Hi guys, thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode of Real World Basics. So today we are going to be talking about writing a resume. This is the first video in our segment on job hunting. So when writing a resume, there are countless different ways to do it. And today's video will go over the basic do's and don'ts of resume writing. We will also touch on a couple of other resume variations like the CV and the cover letter. So I do have some great resources to go along with today's video that I will include in the description box below. Some of them I'll reference a little bit later in the video, but we've got a master list on resume writing, differences between passive and active words, differences between CVs and resumes, and how to write a cover letter. So, what is a resume? A resume is basically a summary of your education and professional history. It's how you sell or market yourself to others when you're looking for a job. So it feels really weird to try and sum up your entire self on a sheet of paper, but having a well-written resume makes you stand out as a job candidate. So what do you include on your resume? You put your contact information, like your name, your phone number and email, so that's how they can get a hold of you. And then your address, because some employers are looking for local candidates. You want to include your education, your professional work experience, your volunteer experience, any relevant awards, memberships, certifications, and or skills. And you also want to include any professional or personal references. So what do you not include on your resume? You definitely don't want to include personal information such as like photographs of yourself, your age. Those two are actually related to legal hiring practices, which we will talk about later in our job hunting segment. But some other information people include on their resumes, like your personal hobbies and interests, your zodiac sign, your body measurements, or links to non-professional websites like your Tumblr or your Twitter. I don't know why you would want to provide that to any prospective employer, but you don't want to include that on your resume because it's not relevant, it's not professional, and it just doesn't need to be included. So when you're limited on space, keep it to the important and relevant information. For your academics, you don't need to list your GPA, especially if it's not great. You don't need to list your coursework. Even if it's relevant, you could mention it in a cover letter and definitely discuss it during an interview if it's got like practical applications to the job you're applying for. And you don't need to include your graduation date if you've already graduated. You could just put the year, if that. I don't even include my high school graduation on my resume since I have my college degrees listed and it's kind of implied that I've completed that level of education. You also don't need to include a personal objective. You'll find a lot of resources that say to include one, but they're usually pretty repetitive, just repeating information that you're listing in your resume. They're usually really generic. They don't actually stand out. And if you are submitting a cover letter, that includes your personal objective. And by submitting a cover letter, that stands out more than just including a personal objective blurb on your resume. Now, how do you format a resume? First and foremost, you want to keep it simple, classic, and professional. There are a lot of different formats out there, but it's really a good idea to just keep it basic, especially if you're just starting out. So traditional resume writing says that a resume should not be more than 2 pages, but if your best efforts put you at just over 2 pages, don't sweat it. The same goes for if you just have a single page resume. Don't add or subtract from your honest depiction of your work history. Now is also not the time to show off your personality. That kind of goes back to keeping it simple, classic, and professional. So it's not time to go crazy with the word art, the crazy fonts, things like that. But you can use things like boldface and italics to highlight items on your resume that you want to draw attention to. Going back to the different resume formats, flowing reverse chronological is really the standard way to write your resume. So you start with your most current position and you go back in time. You also want to format your dates as month, then year. You don't need to include like days, but that one's really important. So just to show you guys an example of a resume, this is my resume. You can see it has clear distinctions between the different segments. Up at the top, I have my information, I have my education, experience, going reverse chronological, and then my certifications that are relevant. I'm also like a certified climbing wall belayer, but I didn't include that because it's not relevant to working in the library. But if I was applying to, say, like work at the rec center or something like that, that would be more relevant and I could include it then. And then I also have my skills listed, all of the different computer softwares that I'm familiar with, as well as my professional references. Now, some tips for actually writing your resume. You don't want to lie when writing your resume. Like, don't say you did stuff that you didn't actually do, but hype yourself up. The language you use and how you present yourself on your resume makes a really big difference. You do want to keep your text concise and to the point. So just avoid whole paragraphs of text, because when employers are looking at resumes, they don't have a whole lot of time. So you want to make sure they don't have to take a huge chunk of time to read paragraphs and paragraphs of text on your resume. They want to be able to glance, get the information that they need about you, and keep it moving. You want to use action words instead of passive ones, which was one of those great resources I mentioned at the beginning of today's video. So a good example from the resource was a passive statement would be, I was tasked with mentoring new hires. But if you wanted to change that to more active action words, you could say, I mentored new hires so that they were better prepared for their role and understood expectations. So it takes it from the that passive sense and puts it more on you. You were doing these things. You also want to avoid cliche phrases on your resume. So you don't need to say, I am a people person, a creative thinker, I think outside the box, because that's just really cliche and it doesn't actually stand out when you put those kind of things. And while yes, you are listing your job responsibilities and duties, try to connect them to how you contributed to the overall well-being and improvement of your place of employment. So from my resume, while I was working as a receptionist at veterinary clinics, I could on my resume put that I managed the front desk at a veterinary clinic. Or I could say I educated clients on services offered and created individualized estimates to encourage client loyalty. So that does seem like a wordy way to phrase it, but it hypes me up. It connects my job of managing the front desk to the veterinary clinic's well-being and improvement by encouraging client loyalty. So you also want to proofread your resume. No grammar errors, no misspelt words. Have multiple people read it over. Run it through several like spell checks, grammar checks, everything, because that will get you disqualified right away. Also, when writing your resume, if you start a new job, update your resume and your job responsibilities and duties right away because it can get a little hard to remember them later down the road. Now, for the variations of resumes, the first thing is your cover letter. This usually accompanies your resume when you're applying for a job. And the difference between a cover letter and a resume is while your resume is a summary of your past experience and qualifications, a cover letter is more of a way to like sell yourself in a more personal manner, and it's why you would be a good fit for their organization. Not just I'm qualified for your organization, but why you as a person would be a good fit. So this was a great quote I found from the cover letter resource I've included. Its purpose is to interpret the data-oriented factual resume and add a personal touch to your application for employment. I have a standard fill-in-the-blank cover letter that I've included with today's in the PowerPoint next to it. So I use that. It's a pretty great basic template, and I'm able to tailor it to whatever job I'm applying for. Now, something else you might see is your curriculum vitae, your CV. You might not encounter this right off the bat once you start your job hunting, especially if you've just graduated high school or early in your career, but your CV is used in academics. Some other countries, such as like Europe, I think they use the CV more standard instead of a resume, but here in the United States, you'll usually see the CV in like higher education, academics, things like that. And the biggest difference between a CV and your resume is length. A CV includes literally everything you have ever done. It has every single work you've published. If you've published in a journal, you've written articles, you've like co-authored books, published research, if you've presented at a conference or anything like that, every single professional affiliation and membership, if you hold, whether you hold a position or not, coursework, all of that crazy stuff. So you might not encounter a CV quite as much, but I did include a resource with it so you can be familiar in case you do come across it. You know the basic building blocks of how to start building your CV. So today's video was a lot of information about what goes into writing a resume, and we'll actually continue talking about resumes a little bit more next week when we start talking about actually applying for a job. So as always, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Manassas Park City Library through email or social media, which I will include in the description box. If you have any questions about today's video or you have any topics you'd like to see covered in upcoming real world basic videos. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next week.